it came out of two things. I mean, because for my doctorate, I'd done sort of 17th and 18th century history, so I knew the period. And it was a particular period when there was an immense amount of work being done in the history of medicine and the history of science, and some very, very, very good, innovative work. And my wife did history of medicine, the 19th century in France, but still she knew all these people. So I met all these people and I read all their books because they were very, very interesting. And I mean, I plagiarized them mercilessly in order to do it. But I've always been fascinated by history's losers. People who devote their life to a cause, whether it was, the English Revolution and republicanism, or communism, or the people who, supported the French Revolution, and eventually realize that their entire life's work has been for nothing, and they've managed to change nothing. I've always liked thinking about them. I've always wanted to write a book about exiles. All these poor kings and emperors who seem to wash up in the various places, wondering what to do with themselves for the next 20 years before they died of old age. And there's that sort of melancholy sadness which appeals to me. But the other thing, having known about that, the other thing I wanted to do was, I mean, there was Umberto Eco, um, but the name of the rose, the detective is there. I mean, who's basically Sherlock Holmes. He's even named what sort of Baskerville or something like that. Um, and but he uses 19th century epistemology to do what he does in that. So I was merely wondering whether you could use 17th century epistemology and approach a murder in the way that they would have done in the 17th century and come up with a murder story which would be actually readable. And it got a bit out of control. There's four. There's an Italian. And they're all sort of on the fringes of the scientific revolution, which was started in this period, or became more intense in this period in Oxford because of the revolution, not because it was particularly stimulating, but because there are all these people who ordinarily would have gone to Oxford and then gone off down to London to be doctors or gone into the church. But the whole patronage system had broken down. And so they couldn't get any jobs. So they were marooned in Oxford. And when you have very, very clever people hanging around with nothing to do, completely unsupervised, just sort of entertaining themselves, they can do remarkable things. You had all these people in medicine, in mathematics, in chemistry, in life sciences, coming up with these ideas like blood transfusion, like Boyle in chemistry. So I just took that, and they wrote a lot. They never stopped writing about themselves. So if you could, and from using them, you could work out how they thought and how they approached problems. So it was a very good idea to take them as the analytic figures in the book. I mean, the first one is an Italian called Marco de Cola, who serves to sort of introduce Oxford by looking at it. And he has studied medicine and is not who he seems. The second one, John Wallis, who was a mathematician who had a 20-year fight with Thomas Hobbes over the nature of pi, and another 20-year. He was a very, very aggressive figure who everybody hated, genuinely so. But he was a cryptographer. He'd been the code breaker for Cromwell, and then, because he was so good at it, when Cromwell died and was replaced again by Charles II, he continued in the same job. He was one of these people who would always float to the surface, but had a very cynical and conspiratorial view of the world. And the third one was...
Is this Anthony Wood?
No, he's the last one. The third one, oh Lord, I can't remember, Willis, who turns out to be insane, but whose father was accused of betraying the king. and he wants to prove that his father was innocent, but he is in fact entirely bonkers. And then the last one was Anthony Wood, who was an antiquarian, an early person who went around trying to preserve and order records and who believed in evidence, and so accumulates all the evidence necessary to sort of solve the crime for Robert Grove. It wasn't an actual murder. I exaggerated a bit there. He was found dead in his room on the day I said he was found dead in his room, and the room was where I said it was. And you can go visit his grave; it's still in the college. But he was again someone who had a very poor reputation. I mean, again, he was widely disliked. But that was exaggerated because, and I mixed it with an incident because the new college was the college where my wife taught. And she got her job because her predecessor had sort of killed himself. Um, and he was also equally loathed and despised by everybody. So I had this sort of Agatha Christie notion of the entire college lining up to do him in. But he was a cleric as well as a historian. Very, very right-wing, deeply misogynistic and snobbish. And he wrote an anonymous introduction to Crockford's Clerical Directory, which is the annual register of all the priests in England. It is possibly one of the least known publications in Britain, where he denounced the terrible modernism of the Archbishop of Canterbury's theology. And it came out who had written it, that he had written it, and so he did the only decent thing, which was he locked himself in his car and killed himself. And anyway, so I sort of merged the two characters together for Robert Grove, a woman called Anne Green, around about the same time, who had this thing of being well, she was accused of, I can't remember what she was accused of, but she was hanged. And they normally if you were hanged, your body was taken over by the university and used for dissection in the library. You'd be carted off into the library, stuck on a table and chopped up. And in her case, they hanged her and they took her and began to chop her up, and she came round, and they didn't know what to do with her, whether to sort of just hit her on the head and get on with it, or to, as they were doctors, were they obliged to? And they decided that the doctorly side of things had to triumph, so they brought her around, and then there was the question of, what to do with her. I mean, were they meant to just take her out and hang her again? And the lawyers successfully argued that she had been sentenced to be hanged, and she had been hanged, and so the punishment had been fulfilled, so she was free to go, which was what happened, which is then round about after that they introduced the phrase "hanged by the neck until dead," just to avoid all possible problems. So again, I took that and tweaked it a bit. I think Fingerpost is just a signpost. You still get them, but they are sometimes shaped a little bit like a hand, to point the right way to go.